Hey friends, tonight we plunge into the bone-chilling world of a medieval English village, where winter's icy grip turns every breath into a frosty cloud and survival feels like a daily wrestle with the cold itself. Picture yourself stumbling from a time portal, your wool cloak flapping, your boots crunching on frozen mud, the air so sharp it stings your cheeks like a Subura wind in January. This is no cozy fireside tale, it is a frozen ordeal where you might not last a week without chattering teeth or frostbitten toes. Trust me, you would probably huddle by a fire and curse the lack of central heating. So, before you settle in, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly value what I share here. Leave a comment with your city and the current time. I am curious who is braving this medieval chill with me. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of a village in England, circa 1200 CE, where timber cottages huddle under snow-dusted straw roofs, their walls patched with daub that cracks in the cold. The air is crisp, laced with wood smoke, frozen earth, and the faint musk of livestock penned nearby. And the village hums with muted life. Peasants trudge through snow, their cloaks threadbare, while children shovel paths with wooden spades. You wear a coarse wool cloak, heavy but thin, your boots slipping on icy ruts as you navigate a lane flanked by frozen puddles. The villagers' faces appear chapped, some wrapped in scarves, others blowing on their hands to warm them, and you notice a man shivering, his fingers blue from hauling firewood. You are here to face the medieval winter's icy grip, a season that tests body and spirit, and you realize staying warm is a battle waged with every step, heart quickening as you brace against the biting wind. You shuffle toward a communal fire in the village square, its flames sputtering under a gray sky, the heat barely reaching your numbed hands. A woman named Agnes, her cheeks red from frost, tends the fire, tossing damp logs that hiss and smoke. She offers you a wooden bowl of hot broth, her smile weary but kind, saying, "Drink, traveler," to thaw your bones. You sip the watery mix of barley and herbs, its warmth a fleeting shield against the cold, and note her chapped lips, cracked from the wind's relentless bite. You are struck by the challenge. Winter here is not just a season, it is a foe, chilling homes, fields, and hopes with equal ferocity. You are tempted to ask about her warmth, but a child's chatter about a frozen well pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers endure this icy ordeal, your breath clouding as you huddle closer to the fire. Here is the principal historical fact. Medieval European winters, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, were often harsh due to the Little Ice Age's cooling climate, poor insulation, and limited fuel, posing significant health and survival challenges, as evidenced by climatic studies and manorial records. You observe Agnes now, her hands poking the fire with a stick. The Little Ice Age, beginning around 1300, brought colder temperatures, with winters freezing rivers and stunting crops. Village homes, built of wood and daub with straw roofs, offered little protection, and firewood was scarce, forcing reliance on smoky, inefficient hearths. Frostbite, hypothermia, and respiratory ailments were common, exacerbated by malnutrition and the Black Death's later toll 1347-1351 CE. You consider the fire's weak glow, recognizing its frail defense, and you begin to admire the villager's grit, facing winter's grip with scant warmth and stubborn hope. You strive to blend in, but your shiver at the broth's chill elicits a chuckle from a passing villager, who tosses you a small turnip, saying, "Bite to warm the gut." You chew the bitter root, grateful, and notice he wears a leather cord around his neck, strung with a small stone carved with a sun, perhaps a winter charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some folk wore sun cords, leather straps with carved stones or bones depicting suns or stars believed to invoke warmth or hasten spring, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's cord, pondering whether it holds faith or folklore, and it offers a quaint insight into how villagers sought solace against winter's chill, turning stones into talismans of hope. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Agnes calls you to help stack logs, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your frozen hands. You begin to sense the village's rhythm, a shivering dance of survival amid frost and scarcity. You overhear a man lament a frozen harvest lost to early snows, prompting hushed murmurs from neighbors. You catch Agnes' worried glance, her breath frosting in the air, and it dawns on you winter not only chills bodies but threatens livelihoods, with cold threading through every log or shared bowl. You recall the Subura's torchlit lanes, where warmth was a distant dream, and recognize this village as a frostier stage, where winter's icy grip tests every soul. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval winter hardships primarily result from climatic shifts or societal limitations? Some scholars assert that the Little Ice Age's cooling drove the crisis, as seen in tree ring data. Others argue that societal factors, poor housing, and feudal demands worsened outcomes, a perspective in social histories. You observe Agnes' chapped hands, wondering if it is weather or want, and lean toward climate. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a frost date over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the village, to an extent. You learn to stack logs carefully, endure the cloak's damp weight, and keep your bowl steady to avoid spills. You pass the turnip's peel to a scrawny sparrow perched on a fence, earning a flutter, and refocus on Agnes, who shows you how to bank the fire for lasting heat. You are fumbling, your fingers numb, but her patient nod steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why winter's icy grip defined this medieval world, not mere cold, but a relentless foe, testing villagers' resolve in every frosty breath. You glance at a passing child, his cough clouding the air, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's perils are just beginning, but you are hooked on its chilling struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the village's frost fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's sun cord vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the frozen harvest, the market's tainted water, and all the villagers battling cold in those icy lanes. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another winter's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating frost without spilling broth or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You trudge away from the village square's sputtering fire, the fleeting warmth of Agnes' watery broth still teasing your bones like a Subura torch's glow fading into a frosty night. Your wool cloak is heavy with damp snow, your boots crusted with frozen mud from icy ruts. The villager's sun cord, carved to beckon warmth, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your chilling encounter with winter's icy grip. The air grows sharper, laced with frost and the faint creak of bare branches, as you shuffle toward a peasant's cottage, its straw roof glinting under moonlight. It is 1200 CE, and the medieval winter's bite seeps into every home, turning hearths into frail defenses. You are drawn to a low, smoky dwelling, where the struggle to keep warm unfolds in dim despair. Welcome to a world of the peasant's shivering hearth, where you battle to maintain heat in a frozen home. Fair warning, it is colder than a Subura cellar, and enduring this hearth's feeble glow will test your mettle more than a village fire's hiss. You step into the cottage, its wattle and daub walls cracked, the air thick with smoke, damp straw, and the sour tang of unwashed wool. A single hearth smolders at the center, its flames licking a pile of damp logs, casting weak shadows on a dirt floor strewn with rushes. You are surrounded by a huddled family, parents in patched tunics, children wrapped in thin blankets, and a grandmother named Edith, her hands gnarled, poking the fire with a stick. Your cloak clings, your boots leave muddy prints as you settle on a stool near the hearth, drawn by its faint heat, though drafts whistle through gaps in the walls. You notice Edith's face, chapped and weary, her breath clouding as she coughs, a sign of winter's toll on frail lungs. You are here to struggle with keeping warm at home, a daily fight against cold that saps strength and spirit, and you realize this hearth offers scant refuge, heart quickening as you brace against the cottage's chill. You huddle closer to the fire, the smoke stinging your eyes, as Edith adds a sodden twig, coaxing a sputter of flame that barely warms your numbed fingers. She offers you a clay mug of warmed ale, her voice hoarse. "Drink, traveler," to ease the frost. You sip the bitter brew, its faint warmth a pale echo of Agnes broth, and note her shivering hands, blue-tipped from the cold despite her efforts. You are struck by the futility. The hearth here is not a comfort, but a lifeline, its feeble glow a desperate stand against winter's relentless bite. You are tempted to ask about their fuel, but a child's chatter about a frozen bucket pulls your focus, and you wonder how peasants endure this shivering struggle, your breath frosting as you shift on the creaky stool, seeking warmth that eludes you. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, peasant homes were poorly insulated and heated, with inadequate hearths and scarce fuel making winters harsh, as evidenced by archaeological house remains and manorial records. You observe Edith now, her stick stirring embers with weary care. Cottages, built of wood, daub, and straw, had thin walls and leaky roofs, allowing drafts to sap heat. Central hearths, often without chimneys, filled homes with smoke, causing respiratory issues while providing minimal warmth. Firewood, controlled by lords or gathered sparingly, was precious, forcing reliance on green or damp wood that burned poorly. During the Little Ice Age circa 1300–1850 CE, colder winters worsened conditions, increasing risks of hypothermia and frostbite. You consider the hearth's smoky glow, recognizing its frail defense, and you begin to admire the peasant's endurance, stoking fires with little more than grit and ale. You strive to blend in, but your shiver at the ale elicits a faint smile from a villager who tosses you a small onion, murmuring, "Bite to stir the blood." You chew the sharp bulb, grateful, and notice he wears a woven band around his wrist, knotted with a leaf pattern, perhaps a hearth charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some peasants wore leaf bands woven cords with leaf or vine motifs believed to ensure a hearth's lasting fire or protect against cold's ills, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's band, pondering whether it holds folklore or fortitude, and it offers a quaint insight into how peasants sought warmth's blessing, turning cords into talismans against winter's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Edith calls you to help add logs, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your frozen hands. You begin to sense the cottage's rhythm, a shivering pulse of survival amid cold and scarcity. You overhear a man lament a frost-bitten kin lost to last winter's chill, prompting hushed murmurs from the family. You catch Edith's weary glance, her cough persisting, and it dawns on you the hearth not only warms bodies but binds hopes, with cold threading through every twig or shared mug. You recall Agnes' village fire, where logs hissed weakly, and recognize this cottage as a dimmer stage, where the struggle to stay warm deepens winter's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did the harshness of medieval peasant hearths primarily stem from environmental constraints or feudal restrictions? Some scholars assert that the Little Ice Age's cold and scarce forests drove the crisis, as seen in climatic data. Others argue that feudal lords' control over wood and labor worsened conditions, a perspective in economic histories. You observe Edith's sparse logs, wondering if it is climate or lords, and lean toward feudalism. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a hearth's design over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the cottage, to an extent. You learn to stack logs carefully, endure the cloak's damp weight, and keep your mug steady to avoid spills. You pass the onion's peel to a scrawny sparrow perched on a rafter, earning a flutter, and refocus on Edith, who shows you how to bank embers for overnight heat. You are fumbling, your fingers numb, but her hoarse encouragement steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why the shivering hearth defined this medieval world, not mere cold, but a daily battle, testing peasants' resolve in every smoky breath. You glance at a passing child, his cough clouding the air, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's trials deepen, but you are hooked on its hearth-bound struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the cottage's smoke fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's leaf band vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the frost-bitten kin, Agnes fire, and all the peasants stoking hearths in those dim homes. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another winter's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating cold without spilling ale or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Edith's smoky cottage, the faint warmth of her shivering hearth still teasing your chilled bones like a Subura candle's flicker fading into a frosty dawn. Your wool cloak is damp with cottage mist, dusted with soot from the feeble fire, your straw sandals crusted with village mud. The villager's leaf band, woven to bless the hearth, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your struggle to keep warm in a peasant's home. The air grows sharper, laced with frost and the distant clatter of hooves, as you trudge toward a lord's manor perched on a hill overlooking the village. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winter spares neither peasant nor noble, chilling grand halls as fiercely as humble huts. You are drawn to the manor's torchlit gates, where the cold seeps into stone and status alike. Welcome to a world of the noble's frosty halls, where you endure winter's bite in a lord's grand but glacial home. Fair warning, it is chillier than a Subura noble's vault, and surviving these icy halls will test your endurance more than a peasant's hearth. You step through the manor's gates, its stone courtyard slick with ice, the air crisp with wood smoke, damp wool, and a faint tang of roasted meat from a distant kitchen. Tapestries hang in the great hall, their colors dulled by frost, and braziers sputter, casting weak glows on flagstone floors. You are surrounded by the noble household knights in fur-trimmed cloaks, ladies in layered gowns, and servants hauling logs, their breath clouding in the frigid air. Your cloak clings, your sandals creak as you approach the hall, drawn by a massive hearth where Lord Baldwin, his face ruddy, warms his hands over a fire that roars yet fails to thaw the room. You notice his fur-lined boots, yet his fingers tremble, betraying winter's reach even in wealth. You are here to endure the cold in a lord's manor, a grand space where privilege offers little shield against frost, and you realize warmth remains elusive, heart quickening as you brace against the hall's glacial draft. You edge closer to the hearth. The fires crackle loud, but its heat swallowed by the hall's vastness, stone walls glistening with condensation. A servant named Marjorie, her apron stiff with cold, offers you a silver goblet of mulled wine, her voice soft, "Drink, traveler," to chase the chill. You sip the spiced brew, its warmth a fleeting contrast to Edith's ale, and note her chapped hands, red from scrubbing in icy water. You are struck by the irony nobles here command wealth, yet winter's bite pierces their halls, with braziers and furs no match for the season's cruelty. You are tempted to ask about their fuel, but a knight's grumble about a frozen well pulls your focus, and you wonder how even lords endure such frosty splendor, your breath frosting as you shift on the flagstones, seeking heat that barely reaches your toes. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, noble manors were poorly insulated and heated, with large stone halls and limited fuel making winters harsh despite wealth, as evidenced by architectural studies and household accounts. You observe Lord Baldwin now, his hands hovering over the hearth's flames. Manors, built of stone with high ceilings and unglazed windows, retained little heat, and even large fireplaces struggled against drafts. Firewood, though more accessible to nobles than peasants, was costly and often damp, burning inefficiently. During the Little Ice Age circa 1300–1850 CE, colder winters increased risks of hypothermia and respiratory ailments, with noble households relying on furs, tapestries, and braziers for meager warmth. You consider the hearth's roaring blaze, recognizing its grand but feeble effort, and you begin to admire the noble's stubborn pride, facing winter's chill with gilded trappings yet trembling hands. You strive to blend in, but your shiver at the wine elicits a wry nod from a servant, who tosses you a small dried apple, murmuring, "Bite to warm the spirit." You chew the tart fruit, grateful, and notice he wears a brass pin on his cloak, shaped like a flame, perhaps a noble's charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval noble households, some servants wore flame pins, brass or iron badges with flame or sun motifs believed to ensure a hearth's vigor or ward off winter's curse, a practice found in manor artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the servant's pin, pondering whether it holds superstition or service pride, and it offers a quaint insight into how even nobles' halls sought warmth's blessing, turning metal into talismans against frost shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Marjorie calls you to help stoke a brazier, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your numbed fingers. You begin to sense the hall's rhythm, a grand yet frigid dance of status and survival. You overhear a lady lament a frost-struck garden ruined by early snows, prompting hushed murmurs from knights. You catch Marjorie's weary glance, her cough echoing the hall's chill, and it dawns on you cold not only numbs bodies but dims grandeur, with winter threading through every tapestry or goblet. You recall Edith's peasant cottage, where a smoky hearth offered scant hope, and recognize this manor as a richer yet equally chilled stage, where winter's bite spares no rank. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did the harshness of medieval noble winters primarily stem from architectural flaws or resource mismanagement? Some scholars assert that stone manors' poor design, lacking insulation or chimneys, drove the crisis, as seen in architectural remains. Others argue that nobles' wasteful fuel use or feudal hoarding worsened conditions, a perspective in economic histories. You observe Baldwin's roaring hearth, wondering if it is walls or waste, and lean toward architecture. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a hall's blueprint over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the manor to an extent. You learn to stoke braziers carefully, endure the cloak's damp weight, and keep your goblet steady to avoid spills. You pass the apple's core to a scrawny sparrow perched on a beam, earning a flutter, and refocus on Marjorie, who shows you how to feed coals without smothering the flame. You are fumbling, your hands clumsy, but her quiet encouragement steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why frosty halls defined this medieval world, not mere cold, but a noble trial, testing their resolve in every shivering step. You glance at a passing servant, his cough clouding the air, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's ordeal deepens, but you are hooked on its grand struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the manor's chill fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the servant's flame pin vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the frost-struck garden, Edith's hearth, and all the nobles battling cold in those icy halls. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another winter's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating frost without spilling wine or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the manor's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Lord Baldwin's frosty manor, the fleeting warmth of Marjorie's mulled wine still tingling in your chilled veins like a Subura lantern's glow fading into a snowy dusk. Your wool cloak is damp with manor mist, dusted with ash from sputtering braziers, your straw sandals slick with icy flagstones. The servant's flame pin, etched to ensure hearth vigor, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your endurance in the noble's glacial halls. The air grows sharper, laced with frost and the faint bleat of livestock, as you trudge back to the English village, its muddy lanes buried under fresh snow. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winter not only chills but starves, with food supplies dwindling under snow's weight. You are drawn to a peasant's barn, where villagers ration meager stores against hunger's bite. Welcome to a world of starvation's winter bite, where you survive on scarce provisions that barely sustain life. Fair warning, it is leaner than a Subura beggar's plate, and enduring this famine's grip will test your resolve more than a manor's draft. You step into the barn, its wooden beams creaking under a sagging straw roof, the air thick with damp hay, mildew, and the sour tang of rotting turnips. Sacks of grain slump against walls, some gnawed by rats, and a single rushlight flickers, casting shadows on barrels of shriveled apples. You are surrounded by gaunt villagers, men in patched tunics, women clutching shawls, and children with hollow eyes, their hands sorting moldy barley. Your cloak clings, your sandals crunch on straw as you approach a table where a woman named Beatrice, her face pinched, portions out gruel from a dented pot. You notice her bony fingers, trembling from hunger, and her weary glance, hinting at weeks of rationing. You are here to survive on scarce winter food supplies, a desperate effort to stretch stores through the cold, and you realize hunger is a silent predator, heart quickening as you join the line for a meager share. You stand by the table, the rushlights glow, barely cutting the chill, as Beatrice ladles a watery gruel of barley and wilted greens into a wooden bowl. She offers it to you, her voice faint. "Eat, traveler, to keep strength." You sip the bland broth, its thinness a grim echo of Edith's ale, and note her sunken cheeks, a testament to winter's toll on body and spirit. You are struck by the scarcity. Food here is not nourishment, but survival, a frail defense against famine that gnaws at every villager. You are tempted to ask about their stores, but a child's whimper over a spilled crumb pulls your focus, and you wonder how peasants endure this starvation's bite, your breath frosting as you clutch the bowl, seeking sustenance that barely fills your stomach. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, winter food scarcity was a major challenge, with limited storage and poor harvests leading to widespread hunger, particularly during the Little Ice Age, as evidenced by manorial records and skeletal studies. You observe Beatrice now, her hands portioning gruel with meticulous care. Winters, worsened by colder climates from around 1300, stunted crops and froze fields, reducing yields of barley, rye, and oats, the peasant staples. Storage methods, sacks, barrels, or pits, were prone to rot, pests, and theft, with meat or fish rare due to cost or spoilage. Malnutrition was rampant, weakening immunity and increasing mortality, especially during crises like the Black Death 1347-1351 CE. You consider the gruel's meager contents, recognizing its role in staving off starvation, and you begin to admire the villagers' tenacity, rationing scraps with little more than grit and hope. You strive to blend in, but your grimace at the broth elicits a faint nod from a villager, who tosses you a small dried pear, murmuring, "Chew for stamina." You bite the tough fruit, grateful, and notice he wears a cloth strip tied to his belt, embroidered with a wheat sheaf, perhaps a harvest charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some peasants wore wheat strips, cloth bands with grain or sheaf motifs believed to ensure food's lasting bounty or ward off famine's curse, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's strip, pondering whether it holds superstition or solidarity, and it offers a quaint insight into how peasants sought to defy hunger, turning cloth into talismans against winter's scarcity. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Beatrice calls you to help sort barley, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your growling stomach. You begin to sense the barn's rhythm, a lean pulse of rationing and resolve amid hunger's gnaw. You overhear a man lament a spoiled granary lost to damp snows, prompting hushed murmurs from neighbors. You catch Beatrice's anguished glance, her hands trembling, and it dawns on you starvation not only saps bodies but binds fates, with scarcity threading through every crumb or shared bowl. You recall Lord Baldwin's frosty hall, where wealth offered scant warmth, and recognize this barn as a grimmer stage, where winter's food scarcity deepens the season's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval winter famines primarily result from climatic challenges or feudal exploitation? Some scholars assert that the Little Ice Age's cold and wet conditions drove crop failures, as seen in harvest records. Others argue that feudal lords' taxes and grain hoarding worsened scarcity, a perspective in economic histories. You observe Beatrice's sparse gruel, wondering if it is weather or lords, and lean toward climate. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a yield's cause over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the barn to an extent. You learn to sort barley carefully, endure the cloak's dampage, and keep your bowl steady to avoid spills. You pass the pair's pit to a scrawny sparrow perched on a beam, earning a flutter, and refocus on Beatrice, who shows you how to sift grain without wasting it. You are fumbling, your hands clumsy, but her quiet encouragement steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why starvation's bite defined this medieval world, not mere hunger, but a relentless trial, testing villagers' resolve in every watery spoonful. You glance at a passing child, his cough echoing the barn's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's famine deepens, but you are hooked on its starving struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the barn's mildew fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villagers' wheat strip vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the spoiled granary, Baldwin's chilly hall, and all the villagers rationing food in those dim barns. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another famine's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating hunger without spilling gruel or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Beatrice's dim cellar, the gnawing ache of her watery porridge still lingering in your empty stomach like a Subura beggar's hunger after a lean market day. Your wool tunic is damp with the cellar's chill, dusted with barley grit, your straw sandals stiff with frozen mud from village lanes. The villager's wheat braid, woven to ward off famine, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your struggle with starvation's winter bite. The air grows sharper, laced with frost and the faint lowing of cattle, as you trudge through the English village, its snow-buried paths lit by a pale dawn. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winter threatens not only humans but livestock, vital for survival, yet imperiled by cold and scarcity. You are drawn to a ramshackle barn on the village outskirts, where peasants battle to tend animals in brutal conditions. Welcome to a world of livestock's frozen plight, where you face the harsh task of keeping animals alive in winter's grip. Fair warning, it is bleaker than a Subura stable, and enduring this icy chore will test your grit more than a peasant's gruel. You step into the barn, its wooden walls warped and cracked, the air thick with damp hay, animal musk, and the sour tang of frozen dung. Rickety stalls house a meager herd scrawny cows, shivering goats, and a few skeletal pigs, their breath clouding in the frigid gloom. You are surrounded by weary villagers, men in patched cloaks, women hauling buckets, and children scattering straw, their faces chapped from wind and work. Your tunic clings, your sandals crunch on icy straw as you approach a stall where a villager named Thomas, his hands calloused, milks a cow with slow, stiff fingers. You notice his cloak, patched with burlap, and his grim expression, hinting at the animal's frail state amid winter's cruelty. You are here to tend livestock in brutal conditions, a vital task that binds village survival to beastly endurance, and you realize each animal's life is a fragile thread, heart quickening as you brace against the barn's biting chill. You settle by the stall, the cow's warm flank a faint shield against the cold, as Thomas pours thin milk into a wooden pail, its yield barely a trickle. He offers you a clay mug of sour whey, his voice gruff, "Drink, traveler," to steady your hands. You sip the tangy liquid, its chill sharper than Beatrice's porridge, and note his frost-bitten fingertips, red and cracked from handling icy buckets. You are struck by the hardship. Livestock here are not mere assets, but lifelines, their milk, meat, and labor sustaining the village, Yet winter's freeze threatens their survival as much as yours. You are tempted to ask about the herd's health, but a goat's weak bleat from a nearby stall pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers endure this frozen plight, your breath frosting as you grip the mug, seeking warmth that barely reaches your bones. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, livestock faced severe challenges during winter due to limited fodder, inadequate shelter, and cold temperatures, impacting village economies and diets, as evidenced by manorial records and archaeological studies. You observe Thomas now, his hands milking with weary precision. The Little Ice Age, beginning around 1300, brought colder winters, freezing water sources and stunting grass, reducing fodder like hay or oats. Barns, often flimsy with poor insulation, exposed animals to frost, increasing risks of starvation, disease, or hypothermia. Livestock cows, sheep, goats, and pigs were vital for milk, wool, meat, and plowing, but winter losses strained food supplies, especially during crises like the Black Death 1347-1351 CE. You consider the cow's gaunt frame, recognizing its fragile role, and you begin to admire the villager's resolve, tending beasts with little more than straw and grit. You strive to blend in, but your shiver at the way elicits a faint nod from a villager who tosses you a small carrot, murmuring, "Bite for strength." You chew the woody root, grateful, and notice he wears a leather cord around his wrist, strung with a tiny bone carved with a cow's head, perhaps a livestock charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some peasants wore beast cords leather straps with bone or wood carvings of animals believed to protect livestock from winter's ills or ensure their fertility, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's cord, pondering whether it holds superstition or stewardship, and it offers a quaint insight into how villagers sought to safeguard their herds, turning bones into talismans against cold shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Thomas calls you to help scatter straw, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your numbed hands. You begin to sense the barn's rhythm, a weary pulse of labor and loss amid winter's freeze. You overhear a woman lament a starved ox lost to last week's snow, prompting hushed murmurs from neighbors. You catch Thomas' grim glance, his cough echoing the barn's chill, and it dawns on you livestock's plight not only threatens animals, but binds human fates, with cold threading through every pail or scattered straw. You recall Beatrice's starving cellar, where gruel barely sustained life, and recognize this barn as a grimmer stage, where winter's toll on animals deepens the village's struggle. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval livestock losses in winter primarily result from environmental harshness or human mismanagement? Some scholars assert that the Little Ice Age's cold and scarce fodder drove declines, as seen in climate data. Others argue that poor barn construction and overgrazing by lords worsened outcomes, a perspective in agricultural histories. You observe the cow's thin ribs, wondering if it is weather or neglect, and lean toward environment. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a herd size over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the barn, to an extent. You learn to scatter straw evenly, endure the cloak's damp itch, and keep your pail steady to avoid spills. You pass the carrot's peel to a scrawny sparrow perched on a rafter, earning a flutter, and refocus on Thomas, who shows you how to bed stalls without wasting straw. You are fumbling, your hands clumsy, but his gruff encouragement steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why livestock's frozen plight defined this medieval world, not mere cold, but a vital struggle, testing villagers' resolve in every shivering beast. You glance at a passing child, his cough clouding the air, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's hardship deepens, but you are hooked on its animal struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the barn's musk fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's beast cord vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the starved ox, Beatrice's scarcity, and all the villagers tending livestock in those icy barns. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another winter's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating cold without spilling away or your cover. You head toward your rented room. The village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Thomas' frigid barn, the sour tang of his watery whey still lingering on your tongue like a Subura stable's stale dregs after a long night. Your wool cloak is damp with barn mist, crusted with straw from bedding stalls, your straw sandals stiff with frozen mud from village lanes. The villager's beast cord, carved to protect livestock, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your grueling task tending animals in winter's grip. The air grows sharper, laced with frost and the distant howl of wind, as you trudge beyond the English village, its snow-buried paths fading into a white wilderness. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winter turns travel into a perilous ordeal, with snow-blocked roads and lurking dangers. You are drawn to a merchant's caravan preparing to brave the paths to a nearby market town. Welcome to a world of travel's treacherous paths, where you face the hazards of winter journeys. Fair warning, it is riskier than a Subura alley at dusk, and surviving these snowy trails will test your courage more than a barn's icy chill. You join the caravan at the village edge, its ox-drawn carts creaking under sacks of grain, the air thick with snowflakes, animal musk, and the faint creak of leather harnesses. The path stretches into a frozen expanse, its ruts hidden under drifts, flanked by bare trees glistening with ice. You are surrounded by a motley crew merchants in fur-lined cloaks, porters hauling bundles, and a guide named Ralph, his face weathered, scanning the trail with wary eyes. Your cloak clings, your sandals slip on icy patches as you keep pace with Ralph, drawn by his steady stride, though his limp hints at past mishaps on these roads. You notice his gloved hands, gripping a staff, and his grim nod, signaling the perils ahead: snow, wolves, or worse. You are here to brave snow-blocked roads and dangers, a journey where each step risks disaster, and you realize survival hinges on grit and luck, heart quickening as you brace against the biting wind. You trudge beside the cart, the snow crunching underfoot, the winds howl drowning the oxen's labored breaths. Ralph hands you a clay flask of warmed ale, his voice gruff. "Drink, traveler," to keep the blood moving. You sip the bitter brew, its faint warmth a pale echo of Beatrice's gruel, and note his chapped lips, cracked from days on frozen trails. You are struck by the peril. Travel here is not mere movement, but a gamble, with snowdrifts, ice, and bandits threatening life and goods. You are tempted to ask about the path's dangers, but a porter's shout as a cart will slips pulls your focus, and you wonder how travelers endure such treacherous paths, your breath frosting as you clutch the flask, seeking warmth that barely reaches your numbed fingers. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, winter travel was extremely hazardous due to snow-blocked roads, poor infrastructure, and environmental dangers, severely impacting trade and communication, as evidenced by travel accounts and archaeological road studies. You observe Ralph now, his staff probing snow for hidden ruts. The Little Ice Age, beginning around 1300, brought heavier snows and frozen rivers, obstructing dirt paths often unmaintained beyond manorial bounds. Travelers faced hypothermia, frostbite, and attacks from wolves or bandits, with carts bogging in drifts or breaking on ice. During winter, trade slowed, isolating villages and delaying aid, a challenge worsened by later crises like the Black Death 1347-1351 CE. You consider the path's icy sheen, recognizing its deadly trap, and you begin to admire the traveler's resolve, braving trails with little more than ale and grit. You strive to blend in, but your stumble on ice elicits a wry grunt from a porter, who tosses you a small parsnip, murmuring, "Bite to steady your step." You chew the woody root, grateful, and notice he wears a leather strap around his neck, hung with a tiny iron horseshoe, perhaps a travel charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval travel groups, Some porters wore shoe charms, iron or bone horseshoes strung on straps believed to ensure safe journeys or protect against mishaps, a practice found in caravan artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the porter's charm, pondering whether it holds superstition or solidarity, and it offers a quaint insight into how travelers sought luck on perilous paths, turning iron into talismans against winter's dangers. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Ralph calls you to help push a stuck cart, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your frozen toes. You begin to sense the caravan's rhythm, a wary pulse of effort and endurance amid snow and peril. You overhear a merchant lament a lost mule to last winter's wolves, prompting hushed murmurs from porters. You catch Ralph's tense glance, his cough echoing the trail's chill, and it dawns on you travel's dangers not only threaten lives, but bind fates, with risk threading through every step or creaking wheel. You recall Beatrice's starving cellar, where scarcity gnawed at hope, and recognize this path as a deadlier stage, where winter's treacherous roads deepen the season's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval winter travel hazards primarily stem from natural conditions or human neglect? Some scholars assert that the Little Ice Age's snow and ice drove the crisis, as seen in climatic records. Others argue that neglected roads and inadequate waymarks by lords worsened risks, a perspective in transport histories. You observe Ralph's probing staff, wondering if it is nature or oversight, and lean toward nature. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a path's upkeep over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the caravan, to an extent. You learn to push carts firmly, endure the cloak's icy weight, and keep your flask steady to avoid spills. You slip the parsnip's peel into a snowdrift, sparing no sparrow in this wilderness, and refocus on Ralph, who shows you how to spot ruts beneath the snow. You are fumbling, your hands numb, but his gruff nod steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why travel's treacherous paths defined this medieval world, not mere journeys but gambles, testing travelers' resolve in every snowy step. You glance at a passing porter, his cough clouding the air, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's dangers grow, but you are hooked on its perilous struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the path's snow fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the porter's shoe charm vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the lost mule, Beatrice's hunger, and all the travelers braving paths in those icy wilds. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another journey's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating peril without spilling ale or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the trail's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You trudge away from the merchant's snowy caravan, the biting chill of Ralph's warmed ale still lingering in your frozen veins like a Subura torch's fleeting warmth on a winter night. Your wool cloak is heavy with damp snow, crusted with ice from treacherous paths, your straw sandals sodden with slush from the trail. The porter's shoe charm, an iron talisman for safe journeys, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your perilous trek through winter's blocked roads. The air grows sharper, laced with frost and the faint crackle of village fires, as you return to the English village, its snow-buried lanes hushed under a gray dusk. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winter not only freezes but sickens, with cold worsening ailments that stalk the weary. You are drawn to a villager's cottage, where a family battles illnesses amplified by the season's bite. Welcome to a world of winter's deadly diseases, where you confront sicknesses that thrive in the cold. Fair warning, it is grimmer than a Subura healer's den, and facing these ailments will test your resolve more than a snowy trail's perils. You step into the cottage, its wattle and daub walls damp with frost, the air thick with smoke, stale rushes, and the sour tang of sickness that clings to the straw pallet. A small hearth sputters, its embers casting a dim glow on a family huddled under threadbare blankets, parents coughing, children shivering, and a woman named Agnes, her face pale, tending a fevered boy named Will. Your cloak clings, your sandals leave wet prints as you settle on a stool near the pallet, drawn by Agnes' weary efforts to soothe Will, whose rasping breaths fill the room. You notice her hands, chapped and trembling, and her sunken eyes, hinting at her own struggle with winter's toll. You are here to confront illnesses worsened by cold, a silent scourge that preys on weakened bodies, and you realize health is a fragile hope in this frostbound home, heart quickening as you brace against the cottage's sickly chill. You sit closer to the pallet, the hearth's faint heat barely cutting the cold, as Agnes dabs Will's brow with a damp cloth, murmuring prayers to ease his fever. She offers you a clay bowl of herbed broth, her voice hoarse, "Drink, traveler," to ward off chills. You sip the watery mix of thyme and barley, its bitterness a stark echo of Thomas' way, and note her persistent cough, a wet rattle that mirrors Will's struggle. You are struck by the danger winter's cold here is not just discomfort, but a catalyst, turning coughs into fevers and fevers into graves, with no medicine to stem the tide. You are tempted to ask about Will's ailment, but a child's weak moan from the corner pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers endure these deadly diseases, your breath frosting as you clutch the bowl, seeking warmth that cannot heal. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, winter exacerbated a range of illnesses, including respiratory infections, fevers, and frostbite, due to cold temperatures, poor nutrition, and inadequate shelter, as evidenced by skeletal studies and medical texts. You observe Agnes now, her cloth trembling as she tends Will. The Little Ice Age, beginning around 1300, brought colder winters, weakening immune systems already strained by malnutrition and smoky hearths. Respiratory ailments, like bronchitis or pneumonia, thrived in damp, cold homes, while frostbite and hypothermia claimed limbs and lives. The lack of effective medicine, reliant on humoral theory, left villagers vulnerable, with later crises like the Black Death 1347-1351 CE, compounding winter's toll. You consider Will's fevered brow, recognizing cold's deadly hand, and you begin to admire the villagers' fortitude, battling sickness with little more than broth and prayers. You strive to blend in, but your wince at the broth elicits a faint nod from a villager, who tosses you a small dried onion, murmuring, "Bite to purge the air." You chew the sharp bulb, grateful, and notice he wears a cloth pouch tied to his belt, stuffed with dried herbs, perhaps a sickness charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some folk carried herb pouches, cloth sachets filled with thyme, mint, or rue believed to repel winter ailments or cleanse bad air, a practice found in household artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's pouch, pondering whether it holds folklore or faint hope, and it offers a quaint insight into how villagers sought protection from disease, turning herbs into talismans against winter's sickly shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Agnes calls you to help fetch water, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to cough in the smoky air. You begin to sense the cottage's rhythm, a frail pulse of care and despair amid winter's chill. You overhear a man lament a fevered kin lost to last month's cold, prompting hushed murmurs from the family. You catch Agnes' anguished glance, her cough worsening, and it dawns on you disease not only ravages bodies but binds fates, with cold threading through every cloth or whispered prayer. You recall Ralph's snowy caravan, where ice threatened survival, and recognize this cottage as a grimmer stage, where winter's deadly diseases deepen the season's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did winter's impact on medieval health primarily stem from environmental cold or social vulnerabilities? Some scholars assert that the Little Ice Age's harsh winters drove illness, as seen in climatic data. Others argue that social factors, malnutrition, and poor housing exacerbated outcomes, a perspective in social histories. You observe Agnes' frail frame, wondering if it is frost or famine, and lean toward environment. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a fever's cause over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the cottage, to an extent. You learn to fetch water quietly, endure the cloak's damp itch, and keep the bowl steady to avoid spills. You pass the onion's peel to a scrawny sparrow perched on a rafter, earning a flutter, and refocus on Agnes, who shows you how to warm water without scalding it. You are fumbling, your hands numb, but her hoarse encouragement steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why winter's diseases defined this medieval world, not mere sickness, but a lethal force, testing villagers' resolve in every fevered breath. You glance at a passing child, her cough echoing the cottage's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's peril grows, but you are hooked on its sickly struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the cottage's smoke fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's herb pouch vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the fevered kin, Ralph's icy trail, and all the villagers battling sickness in those dim homes. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another illness secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating cold without spilling broth or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Agnes' sickly cottage, the bitter sting of her herb broth still lingering on your tongue like a Subura healer's brew after a fevered night. Your wool cloak is damp with cottage smoke, streaked with frost from the village's icy lanes, your straw sandals stiff with frozen mud. The villager's herb pouch, stuffed to ward off ailments, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your confrontation with winter's deadly diseases. The air grows sharper, laced with frost and the faint toll of a bell, as you shuffle toward the village church, its stone silhouette looming under a snow-laden sky. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winter drives the weary to seek warmth and solace in sacred spaces, where faith battles cold's cruel bite. You are drawn to the church's glowing nave, where villagers gather for winter rituals. Welcome to a world of the church's winter rituals, where you seek warmth in religious gatherings. Fair warning, it is holier than a Subura shrine, but enduring these sacred rites will test your spirit more than a fever's chill. You step through the church's heavy door, its stone nave chilled yet softened by the glow of beeswax candles, the air rich with incense, damp wool, and the faint musk of crowded bodies. A wooden cross looms above the altar, and rushlights flicker, casting shadows on villagers kneeling on the cold floor. You are surrounded by the faithful peasants in patched cloaks, women clutching rosaries, and children shivering in thin tunics, their coughs echoing in the vaulted space. Your cloak clings, your sandals creak as you settle on a stone bench near the altar, drawn by a priest named Father Edmund, his vestments worn, chanting a Latin mass to bless the winter weary. You notice his hands, steady as he raises a chalice, though his chapped lips betray the cold's toll, even on the holy. You are here to seek warmth in religious gatherings, a refuge where faith and fellowship offer solace against winter's grip, and you realize the church is both sanctuary and trial, heart quickening as you brace against the nave's frosty air. You kneel on the bench, the incenses swirl clouding your senses, as Father Edmund leads a hymn, its cadence warming hearts if not hands, invoking saints to shield the village from cold and calamity. A woman named Marjorie, her face gaunt, offers you a blessed bread morsel, her voice soft. Eat, traveler, for God's comfort. You nibble the dry crumb, its faint sweetness a contrast to Agnes' broth, and note her trembling fingers, clutching a rosary, her breath frosting in the chill nave. You are struck by the ritual church gatherings here are not mere worship, but lifelines, blending prayer, warmth, and community to defy winter's isolation and disease. You are tempted to ask about the bread's blessing, but a child's hacking cough nearby pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers find solace in these rituals, your pulse rising as you shift on the cold stone, seeking warmth that faith alone cannot provide. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, the Catholic Church served as a central hub for winter gatherings, offering spiritual and physical warmth through masses, festivals, and charity, as evidenced by ecclesiastical records and hagiographies. You observe Father Edmund now, his chalice gleaming as he prays for deliverance from winter's woes. Churches provided heated sanctuaries, with candles, braziers, and crowded bodies easing the cold, while rituals like Candlemas or Christmas masses drew villagers together, fostering community. Alms and food distributions, though limited, sustained the needy, and prayers invoked saints like Saint Martin to protect against frost's ills. During the Little Ice Age circa 1300–1850 CE, these gatherings were vital, countering isolation and disease, though they risked spreading ailments like the later Black Death 1347–1351 CE. You consider Marjorie's rosary, recognizing its fervent hope, and you begin to admire the faithful's devotion, seeking warmth with little more than bread and prayer. You strive to blend in, but your shiver at the bread elicits a gentle nod from a villager who passes you a small wax taper, murmuring, "Light for winter's grace." You grasp the waxy stub, grateful, and notice he wears a pewter badge pinned to his cloak, shaped like a flame, perhaps a ritual token. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some worshippers wore flame badges, pewter or lead pins with flame or cross motifs during winter church rites, believed to carry blessings of warmth or divine light, a practice found in church artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's badge, pondering whether it holds sanctity or sentiment, and it offers a quaint insight into how the faithful sought winter's solace, turning metal into talismans against cold shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Father Edmund calls you to help light altar candles, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to cough in the incense-heavy air. You begin to sense the church's rhythm, a solemn pulse of faith and fellowship amid winter's chill. You overhear a man lament a frost-cursed kin lost to fever despite prayers, prompting hushed murmurs from the congregation. You catch Marjorie's fervent glance, her rosary clicking, and it dawns on you rituals not only offer warmth but bear sorrow, with cold threading through every hymn or flickering flame. You recall Agnes' sickly cottage, where fever ravaged hope, and recognize this church as a warmer yet fragile stage, where winter's rituals battle the season's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did the church's winter rituals primarily provide social cohesion or reinforce spiritual dependence? Some scholars assert they fostered cohesion, uniting communities through shared faith, as seen in parish records. Others argue they deepened dependence, tying survival to divine will, a perspective in religious studies. You observe Father Edmund's raised chalice, wondering if it is unity or reliance, and lean toward cohesion. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a mass purpose over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the nave, to an extent. You learn to light candles softly, endure the cloak's damp weight, and keep your taper steady to avoid drips. You pass the taper's wax scraps to a scrawny sparrow perched on a sill, earning a flutter, and refocus on Father Edmund, who shows you how to arrange candles without snuffing them. You are fumbling, your hands numb, but his calm nod steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why church rituals define this medieval winter, not mere worship, but a refuge, testing warmth in every sacred chant. You glance at a passing villager, his cough echoing the nave's chill, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's trials deepen, but you are hooked on its sacred struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the church's glow fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's flame badge vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the frost-cursed kin, Agnes fever, and all the villagers seeking warmth in those sacred naves. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another ritual's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating cold without spilling broth or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the village church's candlelit nave, the solemn chant of Father Edmund's winter mass still echoing in your ears like a Subura shrine's fading hymn under starlight. Your wool cloak is damp with sacred mist, scented with beeswax from altar tapers, your straw sandals chilled from stone floors. The villager's flame badge, pinned to bless warmth, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your quest for warmth in religious gatherings. The air grows sharper, laced with frost and the faint crackle of distant fires. As you shuffle through the English village, its snow-buried lanes dim under a twilight sky. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winter demands fuel to fend off cold, yet firewood grows scarce under feudal grip and frozen woods. You are drawn to the village outskirts, where peasants scour for wood to feed their hearths. Welcome to a world of fuel's scarcity struggle, where you search for scarce firewood resources. Fair warning, it is tougher than a Subura woodcutter's haul, and enduring this hunt will test your stamina more than a church's frosty bench. You reach the village edge, where skeletal trees loom over a snow-crusted field, the air thick with pine, damp earth, and the faint tang of axe-cut wood. A frozen stream glints nearby, its banks littered with brittle twigs snapped by wind. You are surrounded by weary villagers, men wielding rusty axes, women dragging sleds, and children gathering kindling, their faces chapped from cold and labor. Your cloak clings, your sandals sink into snow as you join a group led by a villager named Simon, his hands calloused, hacking at a fallen oak with a blunt axe. You notice his patched tunic, stiff with frost, and his grim expression, hinting at the desperate need for fuel to warm homes and hearths. You are here to search for scarce firewood, a grueling task that pits villagers against winter scarcity and lordly restrictions, and you realize each stick is a precious prize, heart quickening as you brace against the icy wind. You trudge beside Simon, the snow crunching underfoot, as he splits a branch, its frozen bark splintering with a sharp crack. He offers you a clay flask of weak cider, his voice rough. "Drink, traveler, to keep your strength." You sip the tart liquid, its chill sharper than Marjorie's blessed bread, and note his frostbitten fingers, red and swollen from hours in the cold. You are struck by the hardship. Firewood here is not mere fuel but survival, a scarce resource hoarded by lords or buried under snow, leaving villagers to scavenge for scraps. You are tempted to ask about their wood rights, but a child's shout over a found twig pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers endure this fuel scarcity, your breath frosting as you grip the flask, seeking warmth that labor alone cannot provide. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, firewood was a critical yet scarce resource during winter, limited by feudal land controls, deforestation, and cold weather, posing significant challenges for heating and cooking, as evidenced by manorial records and environmental studies. You observe Simon now, his axe striking with weary force. The Little Ice Age, beginning around 1300, froze forests and slowed tree growth, reducing available wood. Lords tightly regulated forests, granting peasants limited rights to gather fallen branches, while fines or labor demands restricted access. Damp or green wood, common in winter, burned poorly, filling homes with smoke and offering little heat, exacerbating hypothermia risks. You consider the oak's sparse branches, recognizing their vital role, and you begin to admire the villagers' persistence, scavenging fuel with little more than axes and grit. You strive to blend in, but your shiver at the cider elicits a faint grunt from a villager who tosses you a small dried turnip, murmuring, "Bite to fuel your work." You chew the bitter root, grateful, and notice she wears a cloth cord around her wrist, knotted with a pine needle, perhaps a fuel charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some wood gatherers wore pine cords, cloth, or leather straps knotted with pine needles or twigs believed to ensure a bountiful wood haul or appease forest spirits, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's cord, pondering whether it holds superstition or solidarity, and it offers a quaint insight into how peasants sought luck in their fuel quest, turning needles into talismans against scarcity's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Simon calls you to help haul branches, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your numbed hands. You begin to sense the group's rhythm, a grueling pulse of labor and longing amid winter's freeze. You overhear a woman lament a fine gatherer punished for cutting lordly wood, prompting hushed curses from neighbors. You catch Simon's weary glance, his cough echoing the field's chill, and it dawns on you fuel scarcity not only chills homes, but binds fates, with desperation threading through every branch or sled load. You recall Father Edmund's church nave, where candles offered fleeting warmth, and recognize this field as a harsher stage, where the struggle for firewood deepens winter's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval fuel scarcity primarily result from environmental depletion or feudal control? Some scholars assert that deforestation and cold climates reduced wood supplies, as seen in environmental data. Others argue that feudal lords' restrictions and fines exacerbated shortages, a perspective in economic histories. You observe Simon's sparse hall, wondering if it is forests or feudalism, and lean toward control. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a forest's boundary over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the field, to an extent. You learn to haul branches carefully, endure the cloak's icy weight, and keep your sled steady to avoid spills. You pass the turnip's peel to a scrawny sparrow perched on a stump, earning a flutter, and refocus on Simon, who shows you how to bind wood without snapping it. You are fumbling, your hands clumsy, but his gruff encouragement steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why fuel scarcity defined this medieval world, not mere cold, but a relentless struggle, testing villagers' resolve in every scavenged stick. You glance at a passing child, his cough clouding the air, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's hardship grows, but you are hooked on its fuel-bound struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the field's frost fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's pine chord vivid in your mind. The amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the fine gatherer, Father Edmund's rituals, and all the villagers scouring for fuel in those icy fields. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another scarcity's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating cold without spilling cider or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the snowy field at the village's edge, the aching strain of Simon's firewood haul still throbbing in your arms like a Subura woodcutter's burden after a long day's labor. Your wool cloak is sodden with melted snow, crusted with pine sap from scavenged branches, your straw sandals brittle with frost from icy paths. The villager's pine cord, knotted to ensure a bountiful haul, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your grueling search for scarce fuel. The air remains sharp, laced with frost and the faint smoke of village hearths. As you shuffle back through the English village, its snow-buried lanes dim under a twilight sky. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winter's bite pierces not only homes but bodies, with clothing offering frail protection against the cold. You are drawn to a weaver's cottage, where villagers mend threadbare garments to fend off frost. Welcome to a world of clothing's thin defense, where you wear inadequate garments against winter's chill. Fair warning, it is shabbier than a Subura beggar's rags, and enduring these flimsy layers will test your endurance more than a firewood hunt. You step into the weaver's cottage, its wattle walls patched with clay, the air thick with wool dust, damp straw, and the faint tang of lye from a dying vat. A small hearth smolders, its embers casting a dim glow on a loom where skeins of coarse yarn hang, half woven into rough cloth. You are surrounded by villagers' women spinning wool, men patching tunics, and children sorting scraps, their hands chapped from cold and work. Your cloak clings, your sandals creak as you settle on a bench near the loom, drawn by a weaver named Edith, her face lined, stitching a worn cloak with a bone needle. You notice her threadbare shawl, patched yet thin, and her weary glance, hinting at the struggle to clothe against winter's bite. You are here to wear inadequate garments, a flimsy shield that leaves you vulnerable to frost, and you realize warmth is a distant dream, heart quickening as you brace against the cottage's chilly draft. You sit closer to the loom, the hearth's faint heat barely reaching your numbed fingers, as Edith hands you a patched tunic to mend, her voice soft, "Stitch, traveler," to keep the cold at bay. You thread the needle, its bone tip blunt, and fumble a stitch into the coarse wool, its itch sharper than Simon's cider. You note her chapped hands, cracked from spinning in the cold, and feel the tunic's thin weave, offering little more than a whisper against winter's howl. You are struck by the inadequacy. Clothing here is not comfort but necessity, a fragile barrier that fails to guard against frostbite or hypothermia. You are tempted to ask about warmer cloth, but a child's cough from the corner pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers endure such thin defenses, your breath frosting as you hunch over the tunic, seeking warmth that stitching cannot provide. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, clothing for most people, particularly peasants, was inadequate for winter, made of coarse wool or linen with minimal insulation, increasing risks of cold-related ailments, as evidenced by textile studies and household inventories. You observe Edith now, her needle weaving with practiced care. Peasant garments, tunics, cloaks, and hose were hand-woven from rough wool, often single-layered and worn until threadbare, offering poor protection against the Little Ice Age's colder winters circa 1300–1850 CE. Linen undergarments, if worn, were thin, and furs or padded clothing were reserved for nobles. Frostbite, hypothermia, and respiratory infections thrived in such conditions, worsened by later crises like the Black Death 1347–1351 CE. You consider the tunic's frayed hem, recognizing its feeble shield, and you begin to admire the villagers' resilience, layering rags with little more than grit and hope. You strive to blend in, but your clumsy stitch elicits a faint smile from a villager who tosses you a small dried plum, murmuring, "Chew for patience." You bite the tart fruit, grateful, and notice she wears a cloth band around her neck, sewn with a leaf motif, perhaps a weaving charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some weavers wore leaf bands, cloth strips with leaf or thread patterns believed to ensure strong cloth or ward off winter's chill, a practice found in textile artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's band, pondering whether it holds superstition or craft pride, and it offers a quaint insight into how weavers sought strength for their work, turning cloth into talismans against cold shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Edith calls you to help thread the loom, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your chilled arms. You begin to sense the cottage's rhythm, a weary pulse of labor and longing amid winter's freeze. You overhear a man lament a frost-bitten foot worsened by thin shoes, prompting hushed murmurs from neighbors. You catch Edith's tired glance, her cough echoing the room's chill, and it dawns on you clothing's thinness not only chills bodies but binds fates, with cold threading through every stitch or patched rag. You recall Simon's fuel-scarce field, where wood warmed few, and recognize this cottage as a friendlier stage, where inadequate garments deepen winter's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval clothing's inadequacy primarily stem from material limitations or social inequities? Some scholars assert that coarse wool and limited looms restricted quality, as seen in textile analyses. Others argue that feudal hierarchies, reserving finer cloth for nobles, worsened peasant conditions, a perspective in social histories. You observe Edith's threadbare shawl, wondering if it is looms or lords, and lean toward inequities. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a weave's thread count over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the cottage, to an extent. You learn to thread the loom carefully, endure the cloak's damp itch, and keep your needle steady to avoid snags. You pass the plum's pit to a scrawny sparrow perched on a beam, earning a flutter, and refocus on Edith, who shows you how to mend seams without tearing them. You are fumbling, your hands numb, but her quiet encouragement steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why clothing's thin defense defined this medieval world, not mere fabric, but a fragile shield, testing villagers' resolve in every frayed thread. You glance at a passing child, her cough echoing the cottage's chill, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's ordeal grows, but you are hooked on its threadbare struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the cottages will dust fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's leaf band vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the frost-bitten foot, Simon's firewood, and all the villagers mending garments in those dim homes. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another winter's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating cold without spilling thread or your cover. You head toward your rented room. The village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Edith's weaver's cottage, the scratchy itch of her threadbare tunic still pricking your skin like a Subura tailor's cast-off rags after a long day's wear. Your wool cloak is damp with cottage frost, dusted with wool lint from the loom, your straw sandals chilled from the dirt floor. The villager's leaf band, sewn to bless strong cloth, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your struggle with clothing's thin defense against winter's chill. The air remains sharp, laced with frost and the faint creak of snow-laden roofs. As you shuffle through the English village, its lanes buried under a twilight snow. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winters bite seeps through flimsy shelters, where leaky roofs and drafty walls offer scant protection. You are drawn to a peasant's cottage, where villagers battle drafts to keep their homes livable. Welcome to a world of shelters, leaky roofs, where you fight the cold invading flimsy homes. Fair warning, it is draftier than a Subura hovel, and enduring these porous walls will test your patience more than a weaver's frayed thread. You step into the cottage, its wattle and daub walls sagging under a straw roof that drips with melting snow, the air thick with damp earth, smoke, and the musty tang of moldy rushes. A small hearth sputters at the center, its embers casting a dim glow on cracked beams and patched shutters rattling in the wind. You are surrounded by a huddled family, parents stuffing rags into gaps, children sweeping snow from the floor, and a man named Thomas, his face weathered, patching a roof hole with straw and mud. Your cloak clings, your sandals squelch on the wet floor as you settle near the hearth, drawn by Thomas' grim efforts to seal the cottage against drafts. You notice his patched tunic, soaked from snow, and his tired eyes, hinting at nights spent battling leaks and wind. You are here to battle drafts in flimsy homes, a relentless task to keep shelter from succumbing to winter's assault, and you realize warmth is a fleeting hope, heart quickening as you brace against the cottage's icy gusts. You crouch by the hearth, the fire's weak heat swallowed by a draft whistling through a shutter gap as Thomas slathers mud onto the roof patch, cursing softly as it drips. A woman named Agnes, her hands chapped, offers you a clay bowl of warmed porridge, her voice faint. "Eat, traveler," to dull the cold. You sip the watery gruel, its blandness a grim echo of Edith's stitching, and note her shivering frame, bundled in a thin shawl that fails to block the wind. You are struck by the vulnerability. Shelter here is not refuge, but a fragile shell, its leaky roofs and drafty walls letting winter's chill invade every corner. You are tempted to ask about their repairs, but a child's cough from the corner pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers endure these porous homes, your breath frosting as you clutch the bowl, seeking warmth that leaks away like water through straw. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, peasant homes were flimsy and poorly constructed, with leaky straw roofs and drafty wattle and daub walls offering minimal protection against winter's cold, as evidenced by archaeological house remains and manorial records. You observe Thomas now, his hands smearing mud with desperate care. Cottages, built with wood frames, daub, and straw, lacked insulation, with roofs prone to leaks and walls cracking under frost. Gaps around shutters and doors let in drafts, exacerbating hypothermia and respiratory ailments during the Little Ice Age circa 1300–1850 CE. Repairs, using mud or straw, were temporary, and lords rarely funded improvements, leaving peasants to patch their own shelters. You consider the roof's dripping straw, recognizing its frail barrier, and you begin to admire the villagers' tenacity, sealing leaks with little more than mud and grit. You strive to blend in, but your shiver at the porridge elicits a faint nod from a villager, who tosses you a small dried apple, murmuring, "Chew to warm the heart." You bite the tart fruit, grateful, and notice he wears a leather cord around his neck, strung with a small clay bead shaped like a roof, perhaps a shelter charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some peasants wore roof beads, clay, or bone charms shaped like roofs or hearths believed to strengthen homes against leaks or winter's wrath, a practice found in household artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's bead, pondering whether it holds superstition or solidarity, and it offers a quaint insight into how villagers sought to fortify their homes, turning clay into talismans against draft's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Thomas calls you to help stuff rags into a wall gap, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your chilled arms. You begin to sense the cottage's rhythm, a frantic pulse of repair and resolve amid winter's drafts. You overhear a woman lament a collapsed roof ruined by heavy snow last year, prompting hushed murmurs from the family. You catch Agnes' weary glance, her cough echoing the room's chill, and it dawns on you leaky shelters not only freeze bodies but fray spirits, with cold threading through every patch or stuffed rag. You recall Edith's weaver's cottage, where thin cloth failed to warm, and recognize this home as a draftier stage, where flimsy shelters deepen winter's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval shelter inadequacies primarily stem from construction limitations or feudal neglect? Some scholars assert that primitive materials and techniques limited durability, as seen in archaeological sites. Others argue that lords' refusal to fund repairs or provide timber worsened conditions, a perspective in social histories. You observe Thomas' muddy patch, wondering if it is materials or masters, and lean toward neglect. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a roof's pitch over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the cottage, to an extent. You learn to stuff rags carefully, endure the cloak's damp weight, and keep your bowl steady to avoid spills. You pass the apple's core to a scrawny sparrow perched on a beam, earning a flutter, and refocus on Thomas, who shows you how to pack mud without smearing it. You are fumbling, your hands numb, but his gruff encouragement steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why leaky roofs defined this medieval world, not mere drafts, but a relentless foe, testing villagers' resolve in every patched wall. You glance at a passing child, her cough echoing the cottage's chill, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's hardship grows, but you are hooked on its drafty struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the cottage's damp fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's roof bead vivid in your mind. The amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the collapsed roof, Edith's thin cloth, and all the villagers patching homes in those drafty shelters. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another winter's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating cold without spilling porridge or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Thomas' drafty cottage, the damp chill of his leaky roof still seeping into your bones like a Subura hovels cold after a stormy night. Your wool cloak is sodden with melted snow, streaked with mud from patching walls, your straw sandals brittle with frost from the village's icy lanes. The villager's roof bead, a clay charm to strengthen shelters, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your battle against drafts in flimsy homes. The air grows sharper, laced with frost and the distant clang of metal, as you trudge beyond the English village, its snow-buried paths leading to a war-torn hamlet ravaged by a local lord's skirmish. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winters bite compounds the miseries of conflict, turning battlegrounds into frozen wastelands. You are drawn to a cluster of ruined homes, where villagers endure war's toll in freezing conditions. Welcome to a world of war's winter woes, where you face conflict's devastation amid snow and ice. Fair warning, it is grimmer than a Subura battlefield, and surviving these icy ruins will test your grit more than a cottage's drafts. You approach the hamlet, its timber homes charred and collapsed, the snow-crusted lane littered with broken tools and frozen ash. The air is heavy with smoke, rotting wood, and a faint metallic tang of spilled blood, a grim echo of the village's hearths. You are surrounded by weary survivors, peasants in tattered cloaks, women scavenging debris, and children clutching sticks, their faces gaunt from cold and fear. Your cloak clings, your sandals crunch on icy rubble as you near a makeshift camp where a woman named Cecily, her hands bandaged, tends a fire of scavenged planks. You notice her torn shawl, patched yet thin, and her hollow eyes, hinting at wounds and hunger left by raiders. You are here to endure war's toll in freezing conditions, a chaos that strips shelter, food, and hope from civilians, and you realize survival is a fragile spark, heart quickening as you brace against the hamlet's biting wind. You settle by the fire, its weak flames barely cutting the cold, as Cecily stirs a pot of nettle broth, its steam a faint shield against the snow flurrying around you. She offers you a clay bowl of the watery mix, her voice faint. Eat, traveler, to keep life in you. You sip the bitter gruel, its sting sharper than Agnes porridge, and note her frost-bitten fingers, swollen from foraging in the snow. You are struck by the devastation. War here is not just conflict, but a winter curse, amplifying cold, hunger, and injury with merciless force. You are tempted to ask about the raiders, but a child's whimper over a frozen foot pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers endure these winter woes, your breath frosting as you clutch the bowl, seeking warmth that cannot heal war's scars. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, warfare during winter, such as local feuds or larger conflicts like the Hundred Years' War 1337-1453 CE, severely worsened civilian suffering by destroying shelters, food, and resources in already harsh conditions, as evidenced by chronicles and archaeological sites. You observe Cecily now, her hands stirring the pot with desperate care. Winter raids, common in feudal disputes, burned homes and crops, leaving villagers exposed to frost and famine. Injuries from combat cuts, burns, or broken limbs lacked proper care in cold, with frostbite and infections rampant. Displaced populations faced hypothermia and starvation, exacerbated by the Little Ice Age's colder winters circa 1300-1850 CE, with later crises like the Black Death 1347-1351 CE compounding losses. You consider Cecily's bandaged hands, recognizing war's icy mark, and you begin to admire the villagers' endurance, scavenging survival with little more than broth and grit. You strive to blend in, but your shiver at the broth elicits a faint nod from a villager who tosses you a small dried carrot, murmuring, "Bite for courage." You chew the woody root, grateful, and notice he wears a leather cord around his neck, strung with a charred arrowhead, perhaps a war charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval war-torn hamlets, some survivors wore arrow charms, leather straps with arrowheads or blade fragments believed to ward off further violence or honor fallen kin, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's charm, pondering whether it holds defiance or despair, and it offers a quaint insight into how villagers sought protection amid war's chaos, turning metal into talismans against winter strife. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Cecily calls you to help gather kindling, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your numbed hands. You begin to sense the camp's rhythm, a broken pulse of scavenging and survival amid winter's freeze. You overhear a man lament a raised barn burned by raiders, prompting hushed curses from neighbors. You catch Cecily's anguished glance, her cough echoing the camp's chill, and it dawns on you war's woes not only wound bodies but shatter spirits, with cold threading through every plank or shared sip. You recall Thomas' leaky cottage, where drafts plagued shelter, and recognize this hamlet as a bleaker stage, where war's devastation in winter deepens the season's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval winter warfare's impact on civilians primarily stem from direct destruction or indirect hardship? Some scholars assert that direct acts burning homes and crops drove suffering, as seen in battle accounts. Others argue that indirect effects, displacement, and resource loss caused greater harm, a perspective in social histories. You observe Cecily's ruined home, wondering if it is fire or famine, and lean toward indirect. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a raid's intent over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the camp, to an extent. You learn to gather kindling carefully, endure the cloak's icy weight, and keep the fire steady to avoid sparks. You pass the carrot's peel to a scrawny sparrow perched on a broken fence, earning a flutter, and refocus on Cecily, who shows you how to stack planks for lasting heat. You are fumbling, your hands clumsy, but her faint encouragement steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why war's winter woes defined this medieval world, not mere conflict, but a frozen crucible, testing villagers' resolve in every scavenged spark. You glance at a passing child, his cough clouding the air, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's misery grows, but you are hooked on its war-torn struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the hamlet's ash fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's arrow charm vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the raised barn, though mass drafts, and all the villagers enduring war in those icy ruins. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another conflict's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating cold without spilling broth or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the hamlet's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You trudge away from Cecily's war-ravaged hamlet, the bitter sting of her nettle broth still burning your throat like a Subura campfire's acrid smoke after a bleak dawn. Your wool cloak is sodden with snow melt, streaked with ash from scavenged fires, your straw sandals brittle with frost from icy rubble. The villager's arrow charm, a charred talisman against war's wrath, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your endurance through conflict's frozen toll. The air grows sharper, laced with frost and the faint hum of village life. As you shuffle back to the English village, its snow-buried lanes glowing faintly under a twilight sky. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winters bite fuels not only survival but superstition, with folk beliefs offering cold comfort against the season's perils. You are drawn to a wise woman's hut, where villagers seek charms and rituals to endure winter's harshness. Welcome to a world of superstition's cold comfort, where you explore folk beliefs about winter survival. Fair warning, it is quirkier than a Subura soothsayer's chant, and navigating these rituals will test your skepticism more than a war-torn camp's chill. You step into the wise woman's hut, its wattle walls draped with dried herbs, the air thick with sage smoke, damp straw, and the faint tang of boiled roots simmering in a cauldron. A gnarled oak staff leans by the door, and rushlights flicker, casting shadows on shelves cluttered with bones, feathers, and clay pots. You are surrounded by villagers, peasants in patched cloaks, women clutching amulets, and children peering from corners, their coughs echoing the hut's chill. Your cloak clings, your sandals squelch on the dirt floor as you settle near the cauldron, drawn by the wise woman, Mother Elspeth, her face etched with age, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon. You notice her shawl, sewn with leaf patterns, and her piercing eyes, scanning you as she mutters a charm to ward off winter's curse. You are here to explore folk beliefs about winter survival, rituals of superstition that blend hope and fear against the cold, and you realize these charms are frail shields, heart quickening as you brace against the hut's smoky haze. You sit closer to the cauldron, the sage's pungent steam clouding your senses, as Mother Elspeth sprinkles dried holly into the brew, chanting words to ensure warmth and ward off frost's ills. A villager named Joan, her hands chapped, offers you a clay cup of herbed ale, her voice trembling. Drink, traveler, for winter's blessing. You sip the bitter brew, its tang sharper than Cecily's broth, and note her fidgeting fingers, clutching a knotted cord, perhaps a protective charm. You are struck by the ritual's superstition here is not mere folly but a lifeline, weaving charms, chants, and omens to defy winter's grip where hearths and cloaks fail. You are tempted to ask about the Hollis power, but a man's cough from the doorway pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers cling to these beliefs, your breath frosting as you hunch over the cup, seeking comfort that rituals cannot fully provide. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, superstition played a significant role in winter survival strategies, with folk beliefs in charms, rituals, and omens shaping responses to cold, hunger, and disease, as evidenced by folkloric records and ecclesiastical critiques. You observe Mother Elspeth now, her spoon stirring with rhythmic care. Lacking scientific understanding, villagers attributed winter's hardships to supernatural forces, evil spirits, curses, or divine displeasure, using charms like holly, ash, or knotted cords to counter them. Rituals, such as burning Yule logs or chanting spells, aim to ensure warmth or spring's return, often blending pagan and Christian elements. During the Little Ice Age circa 1300–1850 CE, these beliefs intensified, offering psychological solace amid crises like the Black Death 1347–1351 CE, though they provided no physical protection. You consider Elspeth's holly brew, recognizing its symbolic hope, and you begin to admire the villagers' ingenuity, crafting comfort with little more than herbs and faith. You strive to blend in, but your grimace at the ale elicits a knowing glance from a villager who tosses you a small dried acorn, murmuring, "Hold for spring's promise." You grasp the rough seed, grateful, and notice he wears a leather strap around his wrist, tied with a raven feather, perhaps a winter charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some folk wore feather straps, leather cords with raven or owl feathers believed to guide winter spirits away or hasten warmer days, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's strap, pondering whether it holds superstition or sentiment, and it offers a quaint insight into how villagers sought winter's mercy, turning feathers into talismans against cold shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Elspeth calls you to help crush herbs, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to cough in the smoky air. You begin to sense the hut's rhythm, a fervent pulse of ritual and desperation amid winter's freeze. You overhear a woman lament a cursed frost blamed on a neighbor's ill wish, prompting hushed murmurs from the group. You catch Elspeth's sharp glance, her chant unbroken, and it dawns on you superstition not only offers comfort, but sows distrust, with fear threading through every charm or whispered spell. You recall Cecily's war-torn camp, where conflict deepened cold's toll, and recognize this hut as a stranger stage, where folk beliefs provide fleeting solace against winter's hardships. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval winter superstitions primarily empower communities or perpetuate harmful fears? Some scholars assert they empowered, fostering resilience through shared rituals, as seen in folk practices. Others argue they perpetuated fears, blaming misfortune on curses or spirits, a perspective in cultural histories. You observe Elspeth's holly brew, wondering if it is strength or suspicion, and lean toward empowerment. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a charm's intent over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the hut, to an extent. You learn to crush herbs carefully, endure the cloak's damp itch, and keep the mortar steady to avoid spills. You pass the acorn to a scrawny sparrow perched on a rafter, earning a flutter, and refocus on Elspeth, who shows you how to grind holly without wasting it. You are fumbling, your hands numb, but her curt nod steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why superstition's cold comfort defined this medieval world, not mere belief, but a desperate shield, testing villagers' hope in every chanted spell. You glance at a passing villager, his cough echoing the hut's chill, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's trials deepen, but you are hooked on its superstitious struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the hut's sage fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's feather strap vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the cursed frost, Cecily's war, and all the villagers weaving charms in those smoky huts. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another superstition's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating cold without spilling ale or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Mother Elspeth's smoky hut, the pungent haze of her holly brew still swirling in your senses like a Subura soothsayer's incense fading into a frosty dusk. Your wool cloak is damp with hut mist, scented with sage from crushed herbs, your straw sandals chilled from the dirt floor. The villager's feather strap, tied to guide winter spirits, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your exploration of superstition's cold comfort. The air remains sharp, laced with frost and the faint crackle of village fires, as you shuffle through the English village, its snow-buried lanes glowing under a twilight sky. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winters bite forges not only hardship but unity, with villagers banding together to share warmth and resources. You are drawn to a communal barn, where the community gathers to pool their meager stores against the cold. Welcome to a world of community's winter bonds, where you join villagers in shared survival. Fair warning, it is warmer than a Subura tavern's hearth, but weaving these bonds will test your heart more than a wise woman's chant. You step into the barn, its wooden beams sturdy despite a sagging straw roof, the air thick with hay, wood smoke, and the warm musk of gathered bodies. Rushlights flicker, casting a golden glow on sacks of grain, barrels of apples, and piles of firewood stacked against the walls. You are surrounded by villagers, men mending tools, women sharing blankets, and children passing bowls, their faces chapped yet softened by shared purpose. Your cloak clings, your sandals crunch on straw as you settle near a central fire, drawn by a villager named Beatrice, her hands steady, ladling porridge from a cauldron. You notice her patched shawl, worn but warm, and her kind eyes, reflecting the fire's glow as she organizes the sharing of resources. You are here to join villagers sharing warmth and resources, a collective effort to defy winter's isolation, and you realize community is a vital spark, heart quickening as you brace against the barn's gentle hum of life. You sit closer to the fire, its crackling heat a welcome contrast to the hut's chill, as Beatrice portions porridge into a wooden bowl, her movements deliberate to ensure all receive a share. She offers it to you, her voice soft. Eat, traveler, to strengthen our bond. You sip the thick gruel, its warmth richer than Elspeth's ale, and note her calloused hands, worn from days of labor yet steady in service. You are struck by the unity. Community here is not mere survival, but a woven tapestry, with villagers pooling food, fuel, and warmth to face winter's bite together. You are tempted to ask about their sharing, but a child's laugh over a shared apple pulls your focus, and you wonder how this village forges such bonds, your breath softening as you clutch the bowl, feeling warmth that transcends the fire's glow. Here is the principal historical fact. In medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, community cooperation was essential for winter survival, with villagers sharing resources like food, fuel, and shelter to combat cold and scarcity, as evidenced by manorial records and social histories. You observe Beatrice now, her ladle serving with quiet care. The Little Ice Age circa 1300–1850 CE brought harsher winters, straining supplies of grain, wood, and livestock, with feudal systems often limiting individual access. Villages countered this through communal efforts, shared barns, food distributions, and labor pools, fostering resilience against hypothermia, famine, and disease. These bonds, strengthened by church gatherings and mutual aid, sustained communities through crises like the Black Death 1347–1351 CE. You consider Beatrice's porridge, recognizing its shared strength, and you begin to admire the villagers' solidarity, forging warmth with little more than gruel and grit. You strive to blend in, but your smile at the gruel elicits a warm nod from a villager, who tosses you a small dried pear, murmuring, "Chew for fellowship." You bite the sweet fruit, grateful, and notice he wears a cloth band around his wrist, embroidered with a hearth motif, perhaps a sharing charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some folk wore hearth bands, cloth straps with hearth or flame patterns believed to bless communal sharing or ensure abundant resources, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's band, pondering whether it holds superstition or unity, and it offers a quaint insight into how villagers sealed their bonds, turning cloth into talismans of togetherness against winter's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Beatrice calls you to help distribute blankets, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to rub your chilled hands. You begin to sense the barn's rhythm, a vibrant pulse of giving and gratitude amid winter's freeze. You overhear a man praise a shared harvest that saved his kin last winter, prompting warm murmurs from neighbors. You catch Beatrice's gentle glance, her cough softened by the fire's warmth, and it dawns on you community bonds not only warm bodies, but lift spirits, with unity threading through every bowl or blanket. You recall Elspeth's superstitious hut, where charms offered fleeting hope, and recognize this barn as a brighter stage, where shared resources lighten winter's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval community bonds in winter primarily foster social resilience or mask underlying inequalities? Some scholars assert they built resilience, uniting villagers against hardship, as seen in communal records. Others argue they masked inequalities, with wealthier households dominating resource distribution, a perspective in social histories. You observe Beatrice's even portions, wondering if it is unity or unfairness, and lean toward resilience. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a barn's stores over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the barn, to an extent. You learn to distribute blankets carefully, endure the cloak's damp weight, and keep your bowl steady to avoid spills. You pass the pear's pit to a scrawny sparrow perched on a rafter, earning a flutter, and refocus on Beatrice, who shows you how to fold blankets for equal shares. You are fumbling, your hands numb, but her kind encouragement steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why community bonds defined this medieval winter, not mere survival, but a shared flame, testing villagers' strength in every generous act. You glance at a passing child, her cough eased by the barn's warmth, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. Winter's trials deepen, but you are hooked on its communal struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the barn's glow fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's hearth band vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the shared harvest, Elspeth's charms, and all the villagers uniting in those warm barns. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another bond's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating cold without spilling gruel or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this frost-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Beatrice's communal barn, the warm glow of her shared porridge still lingering in your chest, like a Subura hearth's embers after a long night's tale. Your wool cloak is damp with barn mist, scented with hay from folded blankets, your straw sandals chilled from the snow-dusted floor. The villager's hearth band, embroidered to bless sharing, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a relic of your joining in the village's winter bonds. The air remains sharp, laced with frost and the faint crackle of distant fires. As you settle on a snow-covered bench by the village green, its lanes hushed under a starry sky. It is 1200 CE, and medieval winter's trials cold, hunger, and strife forge lessons that echo beyond the snow. You are here to reflect on the enduring legacy of these harsh winters, a tapestry of resilience and resourcefulness that shapes survival then and now. Fair warning, it is weightier than a Subura chronicle, but pondering these lessons will warm your heart more than a barn's fire. You lean back, the bench creaking under you, the village asleep, its hearths dim under a blanket of snow. You have braved winter's gauntlet. Agnes' icy square, Edith's shivering hearth, Lord Baldwin's frosty halls, Beatrice's starving cellar, Thomas' frozen livestock, Ralph's treacherous paths, Agnes' sickly fever, Father Edmund's sacred rites, Simon's scarce fuel, Edith's threadbare cloth, Thomas' leaky roofs, Cecily's war-torn ruins, and Elspeth's superstitious charms. Each trial from frost to famine reveals a world where winter was a relentless foe, yet villagers met it with grit, ingenuity, and unity. You are struck by the legacy. Medieval winters not only tested survival, but shaped enduring lessons of resilience, community, and adaptation, echoing in modern warmth, from insulated homes to shared aid. You think of Beatrice's hearth band, Simon's pine cord, and the Subura's distant glow, realizing these lessons are timeless, heart as a bridge to today's fight for comfort. You are ready to weave their lasting impact, a tale that thaws the ages. You shift, the amulet heavy in your pocket, and picture the villagers you have met. Marjorie's mulled wine, Joan's rosary, Cecily's bandaged hands, each a thread in a saga of endurance. These were not mere struggles, they were triumphs, binding medieval folk to modern lives through shared battles against cold and want. You hold the charcoal stick, its tip worn from sketching your journey, and marvel at the lessons reach how leaky roofs spurred sturdy homes, how scarce fuel inspired conservation, how community bonds birthed mutual aid. You think of today's heated houses, food banks, and winter shelters, seeing medieval grit in every warm room or shared meal. You are starting to feel the weight of winter's legacy, not just its chill, but its permanence, a foundation of resilience, whispering lessons from village barns to modern hearths. Here is the principal historical fact. Medieval Europe's harsh winters, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, profoundly influenced social and technological adaptations, with the Little Ice Age's challenges driving innovations in housing, heating, and community support, as evidenced by archaeological studies and historical records. You trace the stick's grain, pondering the legacy's scope. The Little Ice Age circa 1300–1850 CE forced villagers to patch roofs, share barns, and ration fuel, laying roots for later advancements like chimneys, insulated walls, and communal welfare. Winter's trials, frostbite, famine, disease highlighted human vulnerability, shaping responses from feudal alms to modern heating systems and disaster relief. The Black Death 1347–1351 CE amplified these lessons, with communal survival strategies enduring in today's social networks. You consider Beatrice's shared gruel, recognizing its echo in modern aid, and you admire the medieval resolve that forged these advances, leaving lessons for a warmer world. You reflect further, recalling a moment in Beatrice's barn, her gentle nod over shared porridge, mirrored in a modern neighbor's gift of warmth, both bound by care. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some folk exchanged bond knots, cords tied with specific patterns during communal gatherings believed to seal shared strength for future winters, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in texts. You picture Beatrice's hearth band, wondering if she tied such a knot, and it offers a quaint insight into how winter's bonds were sealed, turning cords into symbols of enduring unity. It is a clever nod, showing how lessons were woven to outlast frost, waiting for new hands to untie them. You are tempted to sketch a knot, but your stick is spent, and the Subura's dawn calls you back. You sense the depth of winter's lessons, not just their cold, but their permanence, like a saga carved in ice. You think of Elspeth's holly charm, Thomas' livestock, and all the souls whose struggles shaped a warmer future peasants, nobles, weavers, warriors. These trials were not just for their day, they were for us, whispering resilience through hearths, barns, and modern homes, from Tang chants to today's warmth. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Does medieval winter's legacy primarily reflect human resilience or systemic adaptation? Some scholars assert it showcases resilience, with communities thriving despite hardship, as seen in survival records. Others argue it reflects adaptation, with systemic changes like better housing driving progress, a view in technological histories. You hold the amulet, its clay a link to Agnes village, and lean toward resilience. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a roof's design over conceding both factors' roles. You stand, stretching your weary legs, and step toward the green, the village's faint fires casting soft shadows. You think of Ralph's snowy paths, Beatrice's shared flame, and all the trials that forged winter's lessons. You have survived a journey barely through frost, famine, and faith, each peril a testament to medieval grit and grace. You are uncertain how they endured frozen wells or warring winds, but you are tougher than you thought, carrying their legacy in your inky hands and heavy heart. You are ready to leave this Subura, but for now, you linger, the village's pulse syncing with yours, winter's lessons a quiet hum under the stars. You stand by the village green, the Subura's dawn soft as a sigh, its mist curling like smoke from a medieval hearth. The Arno hums, a lullaby older than winter's, carrying away the village's echoes Agnes' fire, Beatrice's gruel, Elspeth's chants. Your amulet rests heavy in your hand, a small anchor to a world that endured, its clay smoothed by timeless frost. The village sleeps, its roofs warm under snow, and you feel medieval hopes, gentle as starlight, blending into dreams where hearths burn bright and barns brim full. Your breath slows, matching the green's quiet pulse, and you imagine drifting on the Arno, a reed boat rocking you toward slumber. Let the village hold you, its lessons soft as moonlight, its bonds warm as embers. Sleep now, carried by resilience that endures, gentle as a whisper, eternal as the night.